Hello and welcome to the DVCC client webinar titled Biosignature Modulation, which is basically, in short, the only way you can lose fat from where you want to lose fat from. And basically, you'll have probably heard the word spot reduce, where people think that they can do 100,000 sit-ups and lose fat from their stomach, or lots of tricep kickbacks and lose fat from the back of their arms using exercise. Unfortunately, that's untrue. However, using nutritional changes and certain supplements, you can change your hormones slightly, which actually will result in you losing fat from different parts of your body.
That's because certain hormones cause you to store fat in certain areas. So, and actually, whilst Mark was saying that you can't exercise fat away from a certain area, I think that's because there is a bit of a myth. Sometimes people think that you can change fat into muscle or muscle into fat, and that's actually not physiologically possible. You can't just change them into one or the other. So I think that's probably where the myth came from, that doing lots of sit-ups would actually turn the fat around from your stomach area into muscle and abs, but that's not actually possible. But like Mark says, you can. Where you store fat is dictated to by certain key hormones, and so when you know how you can actually impact those hormones with, well, mostly nutrition, but a few little supplement strategies as well, but mostly actually nutrition, then you can actually choose where you store, where you lose fat from. So like Mark says, Biosignature, we've done, it's a type of particular course. It's quite unique. There's not that many practitioners around. We've done it, we did it how long ago? We did it 6 or 7 years ago initially, and then we've redone it quite a few times. We've done the first one, I think, 3 different times, and then we've also done the level 2 version as well. And so we've traveled to Sweden a few times for that, and then also America, and then actually there's one in the UK which was useful. But it's basically where you choose, or there are 12 different points in your body that are related to your hormones, and what you do is basically take 12 different caliper points using the clippy calipers, and you then put them into an algorithm that then will basically let you know how optimal or not optimal certain hormones, certain areas are.
Now, we've done this for, like you said, about 6 years, and in that time, pretty much most people fall into certain categories of where they store fat. Like, you generally very rarely do get unique cases. It is a matter of the fact that the people do live in generally the same environments, and therefore have been affected with where they store fat by their environment. And so we're going to be focusing on the main points. I'm not going to do all of them today.
No, well, when I originally wrote this, I was going to try and do all the 12 points at once, but when we realised it was just too much. So we're actually just going to do the first 4 today. And just a quick note, there should be a button, hopefully you can see it, I can see it on this screen, but hopefully you can, where you can click and or just type in your question, and that actually will get emailed to us. So if we are too busy on this webinar to answer it straight, we will answer it by email anyway, and you'll get that response today probably. So yeah, ask away any questions you have. You want clarification on any point, just type that in the box and we'll get it straight off. Okay, so let's begin with the first point, which is your chin. Now, this actually is the first 2 points I'm going to go through are actually the only 2 points out of 12 that are non-hormone related. So that's the reason that is because they're called non-essential fats. So basically what that means is, if you were to be thrown into a desert, you had no food, and your body had to utilize its fat stores, it would utilize the face ones first, because it's not near any particularly important organs and things like that. I know you're going to say brain, but that's not quite the same. So what your body does is it allows you to lose fat there at the beginning, basically. So if, for example, you just started on a fat loss plan, you would generally lose fat from your face to start with, because, like I said, it's non-essential. So that's why you'll always see people say, oh, you look different in the face initially. That's because you'll tend to lose fat from there to start with. So then cheek, which is the other site on your face, Again, non-essential, so it's not hormone related, so you can't particularly manipulate it in that way. However, but just by losing fat, you will initially lose fat straight from your face anyway. Is one interesting point though that I've written there, is Mark and I've seen quite a lot over the years, is that when we've done caliper readings and someone said, oh, I've had a really heavy day or night of bad food, sugary food, alcohol, what they actually find is that the face is a lot puffier, a lot more water retention around the face, but it doesn't necessarily equivalent straight into fat. It just means that they're carrying a lot more water around cheek area. So if you may have noticed this already, I think a lot of people have mentioned it to me anyway, that that if you eat a lot of poor quality carbohydrates or gluten containing foods, then you will get water storage on your cheek area. And I think I've probably made it so that we don't see the bottom of that, but basically it says that if you do get water storage on your cheek area, that's generally the cause, is the too much sugar in your retaining water around that area. So then we move on to, oops, wrong one. No, we're right. We're on to triceps. So Mark, talk to us about triceps.
So as it says, tricep is the mother site. That basically means that it is the #1 site where everything else is referenced against. So it is where it is affected by your testosterone production. You can basically tell whether someone produces testosterone and in significant amounts or not, based on how much fat they store on their tricep. And if you were using, like we say, did all the 12 points and then you put it into the algorithm, they basically reference everything against your tricep. So that's why it's called the mother site. And it is very, very important, because even though you may be a female and you think perhaps you shouldn't produce testosterone, every human being does or should do, adult, and it basically is affected. Your testosterone production affects how much fat you store on the back of your arms. So as with age, you'll find, especially as a lady, that you'll increase, or you seemingly increase the amount of fat you store on the back of your arms. And that is generally due to the fact that you're reducing, your testosterone production is reduced with age. However, it doesn't mean it has to be, but it's just a fact that for most people, it kind of just let it slide and that's how it goes. So there's certain things you can do to increase your testosterone, therefore decreasing the fat on the back of your arms.
So some of the things that actually negatively affect that site. So if you do these, you'll find that you'll store more fat in that area. Are things like eating lots of processed carbohydrates. That will actually decrease the amount of testosterone you have and will actually cause you to store more fat on the back of your arm. So that's because basically the hormone insulin is very emasculating. So you have too much insulin, you'll find that your testosterone is lower. So just by eating foods that are more fibrous, so things like green vegetables, but anything that contains more fiber as a food will actually not increase the insulin as much, and therefore won't decrease testosterone. And one of the main culprits, I mean, we've mentioned beer already, but beer is actually one of the worst things. Funny enough, because it's supposed to be a man's drink, is one of the worst or the most effective ways to actually decrease your own testosterone. So by drinking a man's drink, apparently, you're actually going to end up decreasing your testosterone very, very quickly. On a side note, marijuana, not that anyone I know smokes marijuana, but that also decreases your testosterone very, very sharply. Other things that can do that as well, if you're thinking about the amount of toxins you take in. So I think you may have heard us speak about plastic bottles being bad for you if you're drinking from the same bottle over and over again, particularly leaving a plastic bottle in the car with sunlight on it. What happens is you end up leaching, what's called leaching, the chemicals from the plastic into the water that you then drink. And actually, everyday water anyway is also been shown to contain a lot of the female pill that's been flushed down the toilet. So that's got into the environment. I mean, they've actually found areas where there's particularly poor pollution, there's been, I think I read it was like 70% feminization of the fish. Basically, the fish ended up becoming, the males ended up becoming women because of the amount of chemicals that are actually ended up in the water. So they can also decrease your testosterone. So which, when we're talking about this, actually means that you end up having more fat on the back of your arm, which is obviously, if that's somewhere you found that you store more fat than you'd want and you want to lose it from that area, then having a think about what is coming, playing towards chemical wise towards you, increasing that area is worth thinking about. So what can you do? Solutions. Well, alcohol, obviously we've spoken about, but less alcohol will positively impact your back of your arms by increasing your testosterone. So, and when we say increasing your testosterone, as a female, for example, you're never going to have enough to be able to, when we're talking about increasing, we're actually talking about optimizing your testosterone for you. So you'll never actually be able to suddenly become a Russian shot putter, but what we're talking about is actually optimizing how much you should have, rather than being lower levels than you genetically should have, caused by the environment and different things maybe that you're doing. So less alcohol will obviously affect that positively, and also, half mentioned it, but less refined carbohydrates will make a big difference. So less sugar. Sugar plays straight into the hands of decreasing your testosterone, therefore increasing the amount of fat on your arms, and it does actually, it really does impact certain areas. So if you're doing things that, and it's very interesting to do, it sounds like it's hard to actually fathom that it does have that effect, but give it 21 days of actually choosing an area that we speak about and that you're actually, and take the strategies that we talk about and trying them, and you'll notice a difference in that area. Now, supplement wise, for the back of your arms, the best one that and the cheapest, most effective, easiest thing to do is actually to add a zinc supplement to your everyday lifestyle. And a zinc supplement is not only a great way of increasing your natural testosterone, but also is really good for your immune system and just general health. So making sure that you have optimal amounts of zinc is very, very important. That makes a big difference. Now, we're not going to recommend a particular supplement to take, but if you do want any ideas, just email us, put it in that comment box there that hopefully you can see, and then we'll let you know which one we'd say to have, and then we'll do it that way. Now, another great way besides the zinc, which is probably the easiest supplement wise to do it, is to make sure that you get great quality sleep. Now, a lot of your hormones are actually positively or negatively affected by sleep. It's probably the number one easiest thing to actually positively affect every single hormone. Actually, that's a lie. It's probably the amount of processed carbohydrates you eat, because that affects the hormone insulin. But then again, quality of sleep also affects the insulin hormone as well. So actually, I'll go back on that. I will say quality of sleep is probably the number one way that you can positively impact every single hormone in your body. And therefore, by just getting better quality and more sleep. So I was like, as studies differ on the exact amount, I think it probably would play into genetics and also how you're brought up. But 7 hours seems to be an optimal amount for the average person, both being able to get that much sleep and still get everything they need to do done in the day, but also to feel rested. But it's important to mention that when we talk about sleep, we're talking about quality of sleep. So if you're getting up a few times a night to go to the toilet or do whatever, because going to the toilet isn't the way it should be, it's not a natural thing that you should feel like you need to get up to go to the toilet unless you're drinking too late. Ideally, you're not going to drink for 2 hours before you go to sleep. So it shouldn't be that you do wake up in the night. You should actually, as soon as your head hits the pillow, it should be boom, to sleep, and then wake up 7 hours 7 hours later before your alarm. Agree, Mark?
Agree. Good point, Stephen. Well done. So, moving along. Subscapular, which is your back. You'll see, and actually, it used to be
So I want to interject. Sorry, these photos that we've used, this athlete, she's actually an Olympic level athlete. So I don't want anyone thinking that this is the reason they've used this is from the course literature is because she is easy to see things on her, but she is an Olympic level athlete, so she is ridiculously lean, and that's not what a normal thing would look like.
So subscapular, her back. You'll know if you store fat on here, and for ladies particularly, I think with bras and things and dresses, it's more apparent to them. But this is basically your body's genetic ability to handle and tolerate carbohydrates. So you're kind of born with this. You can change it over time, but never super significantly. So if you're genetically not very good at handling carbs, you're going to generally have a higher subscapular back body fat. You can, if you were low carbohydrate and ate really well, lots of healthy fats and things, over time it would obviously go down, but it would never go down significantly because you're still genetically going to be not that great at handling carbohydrates. You can basically, you'll be able to tell, like you'll have some guys, and I know some friends, because I think we're about average at handling carbs. We're not like really super carb tolerant, but we're not intolerant genetically. But you'll have some people that you could go along and eat some food with, and they can eat whatever they want and they won't put on fat. And if you checked out their back site, they're generally probably pretty lean.
But you'd say, for example, our sister, she would be what you class probably as carb tolerant. She has a lean back area, and it's actually important that we talk about. Like Mark says, it's your genetic ability to tolerate carbs. Therefore, you can actually impact that. Say, for example, women that have children, what you eat, what during pregnancy, obviously is important for the amount of fat cells that the child lays down, but also the carbohydrate tolerance. So, and again, that's why I was having this discussion with someone today, actually, that's why a child that's overweight as a youngster is more likely to be overweight as they're older, as an adult, because not only the amount of fat cells they produce, because once you've produced them, I think it's 2 weeks before you are born, and then up until puberty, that's when you produce your fat cells. And from then onwards, you can't actually get rid of fat cells, you can only shrink them or grow them. So that's why obviously the fewer fat cells you have, the easier it will be to be leaner. But also your carbohydrate tolerance will be affected in that time as well. So therefore, the leaner a child's back, obviously we're talking after puppy fat age and things like that, when they're a little bit more mature, that will impact how they affect their carbohydrate tolerance as an adult. So literally, you can actually, like Mark says, you can actually positively help that area, but also years of abuse will actually negatively affect it as well. So someone that starts out able to tolerate carbohydrates won't necessarily always be able to if they're really living a life of debauchery, too much sugar, too much alcohol and too much processed foods. Then that will eventually change. So you can, whilst it's genetically you're probably born able to tolerate more carbohydrates than say the next person, you can actually damage that, put it in simplistic terms, you can actually damage your ability to tolerate carbohydrates. So that friend that you've got who can eat whatever they want, that you're jealous of, don't you worry, they will not always be able to do that. So it's just quite interesting. I have been known to just look at people's backs just to see how tolerant they are at carbohydrates, because it holds very, very true. We've measured hundreds of people now and seen it be correct every single time. So then what are the solutions? Now, obviously we spoke about how the leaner you are on the back, the better able you are to tolerate carbohydrates. So That's not to say that you have a lean back, you should eat lots of processed carbohydrates, because they're still not particularly good for you. It just means that you are less likely to store fat if you do eat them. But the average person will not generally be carbohydrate tolerant. And when we talk about carbohydrates, we're talking about processed carbohydrates. We're talking about bread, pasta, processed rice, things like that. We're not talking about things like sweet potato and quinoa. We're talking about processed carbohydrates. Now, if you limit those, and you'll find that the fat on your back will go down, but obviously you'll also lose fat overall, because genetically that's what the best way you're designed to lose fat is to limit the amount of processed carbohydrates you have. Also, massively increasing the amount of green vegetables you eat. So if you find that you store fat on the back side, on your back, subscapular area, on your back area, then massively increasing the amount of green vegetables you eat would have a really, really, really positive effect. It increases the amount of fiber you have, which will decrease the amount of insulin release when you eat and things like that. But basically, will kind of will make you more insulin sensitive. So will kind of help with the fact that you're not able to tolerate carbohydrates that well. So green vegetables is probably the easiest way for someone who has found that they store more fat on their back and can't actually eat many carbohydrates without putting on fat. Then that's one of the easiest ways you can actually have a positive impact on that. Also, drinking green tea, because does help with insulin sensitivity. And obviously, I think most people know there's studies to show that green tea helps with fat loss. We're talking about 5 to 6 cups of green tea a day. Now, I think if you swapped your coffee, it's actually quite easy to get 5 to 6 cups done as well. And the thing with having too much coffee as well is that it actually acts, as I always say, basically if you have 1 cup of coffee, it subtracts about 1 cup of water from your body anyway. So you need to have 2 cups to be able to just have had 1 cup of water, if that makes sense. So drinking green tea is a great way to increase your insulin sensitivity. You can actually get it in supplement form, but I think the easiest thing to do is just to drink it. There's loads of different types of green tea you can get nowadays. Adding cinnamon to your food. I like this one because it's very easy to do and it is very effective. There's a lot of studies about cinnamon showing that it's very, very good for insulin sensitivity. And I'm not sure if I spelled sensitizing correctly. It doesn't look that right, but it makes you more insulin sensitive. So it will basically help fight what you genetically have been given. So you can put it in your coffee. Quite like it to put it in my coffee in the morning. You can put it on your food. You can put it in all different types of food. Hide it in there. You can use it so that you can taste it. But you can use cinnamon a lot. It doesn't mean you have to then get donuts with cinnamon, and that's okay. But if you add it to all your different types of food, then you'll find it's very good for helping with fat loss, but particularly in your back area, and actually it will help with, because we will speak about this when we talk about the other side that's effective, very similar to the subscapular, which is your hip area, will actually really help you lose fat from your hip area, so basically your kind of tummy area as well, because you're more insulin sensitive. Another one is to eat more healthy fats, e.g. coconut oil, olive oil and nuts. Now, this will help by stabilizing your blood sugar. I'm not saying add healthy fats to, for example, you can't make a donut healthy by adding coconut oil to it, for example. But if you found that you're decreasing the amount of processed carbohydrates you're having, trying to increase the amount of green vegetables you have, don't be scared to increase the amount of coconut oil, olive oil or nuts that you're eating. Now, when we talk about cooking oils, and you've probably heard us say this before, ideally you wouldn't cook with olive oil because it loses its healthy properties at high temperatures. It's not got a very high, what's called smoking point, but coconut oil very much does and is very good for cooking with. Now, if you don't like coconut taste, that's fine, because you can get lots of coconut oils without any flavoring, so they're neutral flavored. And so you can always use it to cook with. So it comes solid at room temperature, but as soon as you heat it, it will melt. It's relatively expensive, but it does last a long time actually, so don't be put off by that because it will last a lot longer than, say, olive oil would. But olive oil is great, but just try and put it onto cold foods, salads and things like that. Great for this time of year when lots of barbecues having and lots of salads going on. Throw some olive oil on there, don't be scared. Some nuts. When we talk about nuts, pay attention to the fact that they are moreish. You can eat an awful lot of them without really realizing. So just kind of limit yourself. About 10 nuts at a time is fine. But just by putting them into, so you can have a few servings of 10 in the day, but not half a packet at once. Now underneath there, I don't think you'll be able to see that because I've not set it up correctly, but I've just mentioned about taking insulin sensitizing supplements, such as, come back to the thing, such as something called carnitine. Now we're going to talk about carnitine in a following webinar, which we'll talk about sleep, well actually we'll talk about stress and your stomach, but what you find is carnitine is very good at making you insulin sensitive, but it's also very good at giving you energy as well. So that's supplement wise. We're not going to try and actually recommend very many supplements, I don't think, because there's mostly a lot of nutritional things that you can be doing first. If you then say, look, I'm doing these nutritional things, what supplement wise can I go for, then just type it in the box and let us know, and then we'll let you know. But we don't want to just do a blanket prescription of different supplements because it's easier, cheaper and more effective for you to just take on board the nutritional things first. I mean, cinnamon is very easy. Drinking green tea is very easy. Increasing the amount of green vegetables you have is obviously very easy, but something that I don't think many of us do as much as we could do. So anything else to finish with, Mark, before we close? There's quite a, I can see quite a few questions come in through.
No, just if you do have any questions try and make the questions perhaps on these body parts to start with, because we are doing another, well, it might be another 2 webinars on the other parts of the body. So try and hopefully reference these ones first, because we'll be able to answer them, and then we'll answer the other body parts in the other webinars. But shoot across any questions you have, as always. See you next time, I guess. But we're going to be sending out this as a replay. Do not share it if you wouldn't mind with outside, just it's for clients, it's specifically for you guys, for you as a client. It's not really for the general public. So appreciate it if you didn't send out the link to anyone else, bar your friends at the DVCCers. All right, take care. Thank you. Bye bye.